People on Flight 678 to Washington remembered the moment the cabin fell silent. Not when turbulence hit, not when the captain made an announcement, but when a quiet man in a worn janitor uniform, sitting alone in seat 12F, accidentally dropped a small metal tag that clattered onto the aisle floor. No one expected what happened next. No one expected the entire F-22 elite command traveling on the same flight to suddenly rise to their feet and salute him. And not one person understood why, not until his story unfolded, layer by layer, turning ordinary passengers into witnesses of a truth that had been buried too long. By the end of the flight, the man who had once been ignored became someone no one would ever forget. Ethan Ward had mastered the art of being invisible. Years of working double shifts as an airport janitor had taught him that people rarely looked down, rarely noticed a man mopping floors at 3 a.m., rarely saw the exhaustion buried in his eyes, or the way he checked his phone every hour for messages from his 8-year-old son, Liam. Since his wife's passing 2 years earlier, Ethan's life had been reduced to 2 missions: keep his boy safe, and keep the lights on. His coworkers knew him as the polite, quiet janitor who never complained, even when life seemed determined to crush him. But buried beneath the uniform, the rubber gloves, and the quiet voice was a past Ethan never talked about, a past that earned him a call sign whispered once in classified radio channels, a past he had folded and tucked away like an old photograph. That morning, he wasn't scheduled to fly anywhere. But the school called. Liam had collapsed during gym class. A heart complication they hadn't known about. The doctor demanded immediate evaluation at a children's hospital in Washington. Ethan booked the cheapest seat he could find, 12F, squeezed between a businessman tapping away on his laptop and a woman posting vacation pictures. He sat down quietly, clutching a folder of Liam's medical reports, praying the flight would land fast. The businessman beside him sighed loudly when Ethan brushed against him accidentally. "Watch it," he muttered without looking. "Sorry," Ethan whispered. The woman on the aisle glanced at his janitor uniform and immediately shifted away, as if he carried a shadow she didn't want touching her perfect life. Ethan ignored them. He was used to this kind of silence, the kind that pushed him into corners, made him smaller. He looked out the window, breathing slow. He just needed to get to Washington. Nothing else mattered. But then the plane doors opened again. A group of passengers entered, 6 men and 2 women in civilian clothes, carrying black military duffel bags. Their posture, sharp eyes, and rigid discipline didn't need uniforms to reveal who they were. Even without knowing their names, you could feel it: military, elite. People whispered. "F-22 pilots," someone murmured. "Special command," said another. Ethan's head turned, almost on instinct, as if an old piece of him flickered awake for the first time in years. The team walked down the aisle, until one of the pilot's eyes drifted to him. Not at his face, but at the chain around his neck. A dog tag just barely visible beneath his janitor shirt collar. Ethan tucked it back quickly. Too late. Their eyes narrowed. Studied him. Something like recognition surfaced. But the pilots kept walking, taking their seats several rows behind him. Ethan let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. The last thing he wanted was attention, especially from them. Not today. Not ever. The plane pushed back. The engines rumbled. And just when Ethan thought he would survive the flight unnoticed, fate decided otherwise. The turbulence hit hard. The cabin lights flickered. A panel above Ethan's seat snapped open, and his old metal tag, a small engraved emblem, fell from his pocket and clattered across the aisle. Passengers turned. But 8 elite F-22 officers froze. Their faces changed from mild annoyance to shock, to recognition, to respect so sharp it cut through the trembling cabin air. One by one, they stood up from their seats. Passengers gasped. The pilots were saluting. At the janitor no one ever looked at. And Ethan Ward closed his eyes, knowing the past he fought so hard to bury had just found him again. The cabin was dead silent. Even the turbulence seemed to pause, as if the entire aircraft held its breath. "Sir?" The lead pilot stepped forward slightly, voice steady despite the shaking plane. Is that really you? Ethan swallowed hard, eyes still closed. He had prayed this moment would never come. The passengers looked between Ethan and the pilots, confused, curious, awestruck. The businessman beside him stared as if seeing him for the first time. Finally, Ethan opened his eyes. Sit down, he whispered. Please. But the lead pilot didn't move. Call sign Ghost Hawk, he said, voice trembling with something between reverence and disbelief. Sir, we were told you died. Every muscle in Ethan's body tensed. The name, the call sign, stabbed into him like lightning. Ghost Hawk. A legend in the Air Force. A pilot who had flown missions no one would officially confirm. A man who once saved an entire squadron by breaking formation, violating orders, and drawing enemy fire away long enough for them to escape. A man who then disappeared after the crash that killed his wife, choosing fatherhood over fame, isolation over medals. Ghost Hawk. A name he had tried to erase. Passengers gasped, eyes widening, mouths dropping. The businessman whispered, You're him? The woman beside him pressed a hand to her chest. Ethan shook his head. That man doesn't exist anymore. The lead pilot stepped closer. With respect, sir, heroes don't just stop existing. Ethan's throat tightened. I'm no hero, he said quietly. I'm just trying to save my son. His voice cracked, not from fear, but from the raw truth finally spilling out. And maybe that vulnerability, more than any call sign, was what changed the atmosphere in the plane. People softened. Judgment evaporated. They saw a father, not a uniform. A man carrying invisible weight. The turbulence hit again, harder this time. Oxygen masks dangled. People gasped and held their seats, but the F-22 command didn't move. Their eyes were locked on Ethan, steady as stone. Sir, the lead pilot said, you saved our commander. You saved my wingman. You saved men who went home to their families because you broke orders to protect them. That isn't something you hide behind a mop. That's something we honor. Ethan looked away, blinking fast. I don't need honor, he whispered. I need my son to get the surgery he needs. A softer silence settled. Then something unexpected happened. The pilot closest to him said, almost gently, Then let us help. Ethan frowned. Help? Another pilot nodded. We have medical contacts in Washington. Military priority. We can get your son seen today, no waiting lists, no delays. A woman from the team stepped forward. And if you need funding, the Ghost Hawk saved enough of us that we can cover that too. Ethan froze. The businessman beside him lowered his head in shame. The woman on the aisle wiped her eyes. It was the first time in years Ethan felt something breaking inside him, not weakness, but relief. The plane steadied. The turbulence faded. One by one, the F-22 pilots saluted him again, not Ghost Hawk, not a legend, but a father fighting alone. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan let someone stand beside him. Because sometimes, being a hero wasn't about flying into danger. Sometimes it was about letting people in when you needed them most.